do help and complete this short survey, as it will be of great help for us to just improve and deliver better content that you're interested in the best possible way. So we recommend that your cameras are off and on mute unless you have a question. On the topic of questions, we kindly ask that if you have any, please put them at the end of each presentation. There will be a brief Q&A. I say brief because our main Q&A will be at the very end of all of the presentations. And at that time, we also encourage you to let us know your thoughts on this theme, as well as your questions. You can also pop your questions in the chat area. I will be keeping my eye on it. So that's another way of doing so. Without further ado, I will pass you on to the second host, Martin.
Thanks, Rania.
Thank you.
So yes, as you can see on the slide, my name is Martin Hughes. I'm Associate Director at Faithful and Gould in their risk team. Currently working on Sizewell C. In fact, the last 3 roles I have had have been working on nuclear power stations, hence my involvement with the IRM Nuclear Significant Interest Group. But as Rania said before, thank you all for joining us today. Just a bit of background for you all. This event has been a long time in the planning, probably about 9 to 12 months, and it stems from a desire of the Nuclear SIG Committee to run a joint webinar with other SIGs and also to bring in industry experts. The thinking behind what we want to do, our aspiration, is that we want to make this an annual IRM event where we can reach out to members and non-members, and more importantly to the younger generations out there, including students and those who are early in their careers, so they can become involved in the discussions, broaden their experience, and maybe, hopefully, maybe just get involved in running their own events in the future. Okay, so the theme is climate change and risk management, and climate change doesn't really need too much of an introduction, to be honest. I think we can all say that we're witnessing the changes to our climate in what we see on the news with regards to weather events, and this is all happening in our generation. And we are I suppose we're the generation that has the chance now to implement changes and developments to slow down and, where possible, reverse climate change. The interesting thing will be going forward is how successful we are at doing that, particularly in the current economic climate. And that's where this webinar comes into play. We wanted this to be an opportunity for people to listen and ask questions of the experts in their fields, rather than always getting their information from the internet and the news. Our intention of this event is to fuel debate across the different perspectives of the SIGs and the external subject matter experts with regards to risk management and climate change. And as I say, the goal is that the attendees will learn, question, and go away better informed of the challenges faced by all of us in addressing the risks surrounding climate change. Our ESG keynote speaker, Isabel, will be presenting the key concepts as well as bringing together the threads of the supporting presentations that will bring a focus on risk management from the different areas of expertise on the same theme. So we've got an interesting agenda for you today, but before I dip into that, again, we've got our housekeeping that the session is going to be recorded. I've already hit the record button and didn't realize I was going to get a message telling that it was going to do that. Recommend that we have our cameras off and you're on mute unless you want to ask a question, or if you're presenting and you want to put your camera on. Rania touched upon a brief Q&A at the end of each presentation. We've got a survey. Please complete the survey because it helps us produce better webinars and events for you in the future. So the agenda that we've got today is we've got 5 presentations. We've got Isabel Alice O'Connell, who's dialing in from Vancouver in Canada. She's our keynote speaker today. We've got Dr. Abdul Mohib. He's a member of the ESG SIG. He's the second presentation that we've got. And then we've got Grant and Rick, who are from the IRM Energy and Renewables SIG. I think after that third presentation, I think we've got a break scheduled, just a quick 5 minutes so people can disappear out and go to the loo and make a coffee. And then we got Matthew. Matthew's our business side of the event. from TUV Sud. He's going to talk to us about global attitudes to risk. And then we've got Nicola, who's from the IRM Nuclear SIG. At the end of that, we've got our discussion, question and answer session. So that's where you guys can jump in and ask challenging questions, bring your own thoughts and opinions into the piece as well to promote that discussion. Okay, so as I mentioned from the agenda, Isabel is our keynote speaker today, and she is an awarding ESG leader with 20 years of experience promoting shared value through reporting, facilitation, impact assessment, and mega project compliance and regulation reviews. Her work focuses on supporting organizations to understand the transition to address material ESG issues and how they relate to mainstream investors, businesses, and their customers. Isabel, it's over to you now. You're on mute, I'm afraid, Isabel.
Thank you.
There's always got to be somebody.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you everyone for coming today. First, I want to acknowledge that I am calling in from the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations of the traditional territories of the First Nation that I call in for, better known as Vancouver, Canada. In Canada, we always acknowledge the land from which we call in from that is traditionally owned by the First Nations. So, not a day passes without another article of environmental social governance, or ESG, with trends accelerating around the world, and in particular, climate change being at the forefront of the ESG movement. Consumer and investor concerns combined with government's increasing active role in addressing climate change reinforce the need for companies to develop and evolve their ESG strategies, policies, and action plans. So today we're going to be listening from a variety of speakers from the risk management perspective, and we can all agree that this is definitely a risk management issue, that being climate change. And each of us has a background that touches upon ESG that really acts as the anchor as well. And there'll be different presentations regarding the E, but there will also be that the necessity to bring in the S and the G piece, because climate change without the S and without the people and of course the governance piece, we're really kind of lost. We're just focusing on the environment. I also will be popping in and out of the conversation because we are going to be looking at it from the energy focus. And in particular, at the end of this discussion, we will be having a broader discussion about the just transition, and certainly we'll be bringing in more information about that and wanting to learn from you as well. So it can be challenging to know where to turn to assess risk and set climate change goals using the best science to navigate uncertainty. No doubt, we are all aware that every part of the global economy is potentially affected by some aspect of climate change. Here are some of the climate change terminology we are all becoming aware of and will likely hear more about in the future. And there's likely more terminology. I mean, it grows every day, the amount of climate change related terminology that we use. But these are ones that are on the hot seat, as we say, or, they are very much industry agnostic. Now, regulation-wise, nations will convene. Martin, did you want to switch the slide, please? Nations will convene again in Egypt next month for COP27 to continue discussing the most pressing climate change issues and report the actions they have taken to mitigate climate change since COP26 in Glasgow. Recently, the US Securities and Exchange Commission, better known as SEC, has taken several steps to accelerate the push for more standardized ESG disclosures, including enhancing its focus on existing climate-related guidance. It's important to note that ESG provides a myriad of disclosures, frameworks, standard-setting entities, and evaluation models. I'm sure you've all felt that you were either eating alphabet soup with all the acronyms that float around in ESG. However, what's core to all of this is shareholders, suppliers, customers, communities, employees, governments, and non-governmental organizations must all be considered. SEC also announced that it is seeking the public's comment in developing new climate change disclosure rules and the creation of an ESG task force to crack down on potential disclosure violations. So often with ESG, it's mirrored after, Sarbanes-Oxley in 2002, after, the financial crisis of 2001. Given the potential impact of physical and transitional climate change risks on many businesses, certain climate change assessment and reporting standards are increasingly becoming legal requirements. So that's in the US. In the UK, where quite a few of you are calling in from, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer requires certain companies to improve their climate risk reporting. That began in 2021, with even broader climate change disclosure rules expected to take effect by 2025. These rules are expected to be based on the TCFD, or better known as the Task Force for Climate-Related Change Disclosures recommendations. So that's the default climate change ESG disclosure reporting tool, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. Now, I can't leave Canada out because I called in, and I'm happy to see that there's a few others that have called in from Canada. In Canada, the Ontario Security Commission, Ontario is a province in Canada, has also issued a guidance on climate change related disclosure and participated in the Capital Markets Modernization Task Force report, which was released in January 2021, and which recommends mandating disclosures of material ESG information, specifically climate change related disclosure that is compliant with TCFD recommendations for issuers through regulatory filing requirements. While these regulatory developments continue, lenders and other parties are increasingly required by their counterparts to make climate change related disclosures. For example, again, another one in Canada, recent large employer loans programs that were supported by the government of Canada in response to the COVID-19 required recipients to commit to publish annual climate change disclosures consistent with TCFD recommendations. And can never leave the private sector off in this. And the oil and gas sector is near and dear to my heart. And in response to recent scrutiny, activist shareholders of ExxonMobil Corporation, so the large US oil and gas company, likely targeted more climate change lawsuits and enforcement actions. And the outcome of this was new directors to its boards were forced to consider strategy and the effects of climate change in their board of directors summaries and reports, and even in their the job description requirements. So next slide. So the following guideposts to keep in mind when listening to the presentation. Martin, can you try? Thank you. These are some guideposts to keep in mind because it's becoming clear that the combined regulatory requirements and financial incentives will likely shape future trends in climate change assessment and disclosure. And the first one, carrot sticks, or a combination of both. I mean, that's a bit old-fashioned thing to say, but there may be performance incentives that continue to compel companies to invest in climate change solutions or to improve their internal processes for managing climate risks. These can be through the adoption of voluntary standards. Number two, knows no border. Well, although we don't know precisely how, where, and when, there should be no dispute that the climate is changing everywhere. We're seeing temperatures increasing, wet areas becoming wetter, dry areas are becoming drier, storms are becoming more destructive, and of course, we can't overlook the fact that sea levels are rising as well. It's more than physical. The law is evolving as a result of climate change, and the ESG trend and companies will face new legal, regulatory, and transitional risks. Transitional is key in climate change. ESG is an emerging as the new regulator, and that's one of my taglines, and I'm happy to share it with all of you because each level of government is not only taking an increasingly active role in addressing climate change, but a new regulator is emerging from this. Investors, shareholders, consumers, and supply chains are driving companies to develop and evolve their climate change policies, and that is particularly true at the board level. And the fifth, understand risks before disclosure. Many companies have increased the scope and quantity of voluntary ESG disclosures over the past decade in response to demands by investors and consumers for greater visibility. Before a company makes any disclosure, it needs to understand what risks, in this case, climate change, pose the company. So it's almost like that materiality assessment. The disclosures should include quantitative information and metrics. The disclosures should also include any opportunity that climate change presents. This can be positive and negative. We are looking at electric vehicles, and that is being driven by the need to address climate change. And this is where companies can get so creative, especially in the scenario planning piece, which is key to the TCFD disclosure that I discussed earlier. Next slide, please. And to make sure that all of you are considered in this, I wanted to make sure that we have a risk management and climate change. And I saw it as two parts when considering climate change. There's the probability that adverse event will occur. And then there is the consequences of the adverse event, because these things do happen, of course, and we see it rapidly happening in our world right now. But existing risk management programs can be used, but they need to be adapted to include specific risks and timeframes associated with climate change. Companies should begin by developing an inventory of assets first, evaluating the importance of each asset, and implementing a high degree of initial screening of their core operations to prioritize areas that are most at risk and may require a detailed assessment. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, what we need is, Martin, next slide, please. Okay,
sorry, yeah.
I'm just going to go ahead. Yeah. So risks and priorities, this is again very high level, I realize, but what is so important is recognizing risk is one thing. Having a clear strategy that can be implemented is another. It's not just about disclosures. Investors and stakeholders want to see the company's plan to address climate change. So that whole piece of the external has to be considered also with the internal. Plans and compliance programs must be based on risks and material issues, like the issues we were discussing previously. These will be different for each company. There is a no one-size-fits-all approach or plan to address climate change. It's critical to determine what is important to your company. When developing a plan, the plan should address attaining resilience, decarbonization, and how the company will finance these activities. Very key to ESG is the financial piece. Adapting to climate change and building resilience is really no different from what prudent companies have already been doing. Strategic planning, risk assessment, investing in infrastructure, diversifying the supply chain, safeguarding employees, and using the best available information and data and science to address potential risk. Successful companies are seeking to gain a competitive advantage and seize opportunities by effectively assessing and managing climate change risks. Scientists believe that it's essential that we meet the goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050, with an interim goal of a 45% emission reduction by 2030. Many companies have established decarbonization as a priority and pledged to attain net zero. Very wonderful. But not all net zero policies are equal. When some companies say they are aiming for net zero, they are only talking about emissions that come directly from their own operations. To be meaningful, a policy that is, net zero must include a company's Scope 3 emissions, which include emissions from customers that use a company's products, as well as a company's supply chain. Achieving net zero is no simple task and will look different for each company. A company's plan must also include how it's going to pay for those measures to address climate change. These investments may require substantial upfront costs that generate benefits over many years. There are, however, new and evolving financial models and mechanisms, and companies will need to look at a variety of ways financing these measures, including corporate green bonds, public sector financing, and new insurance products. We cannot leave the insurance industry out of climate change. There are uncertainties, of course, with climate change, and when faced with uncertainties, companies should stay close to the science and build their protection plan around that. Companies should also develop strategies that are adaptive, flexible, and can be changed as more is learned about the nature and vulnerabilities of climate change. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, but you do need to start now. Again, that's one of my favorite taglines. And inaction comes at a cost. The quicker, more adaptable companies will be the companies that overcome these risks and thrive. The conversation needs to shift from the world is falling apart to what can my company do? Or what can my community do? What can my country do? And most importantly, you're not alone. We have a big network here, but also there's a number of voluntary disclosure frameworks and standards have been developed to assist companies in making climate change disclosures. The key one being the TCFD, but there are other ones that can be accessed. Look to industry groups and ESG experts to access information, but remember that not all experts are equal. Companies will need to establish climate transition teams to meet their goals. It's not just up to the compliance or sustainability department. Climate change should be integrated into the company and involve corporate leadership, directors, internal ESG personnel, and outside experts as well. Find the best technical and legal experts that work together and collaborate. And that's key to building those climate change scenarios as well. So next slide, please, Martin. In order to tackle climate change, pollution, and plummeting biodiversity, nations and businesses need to transition towards a cleaner, resilient, and climate neutral economy and society. A just transition means greening the economy in a way that is fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. We'll have a broader discussion about the just transition later on in this symposium, but these are 3 points that I think are key. It's also good to know that it came out of the Paris Agreement in 2015, which was, I think, was like COP 23, I think. This is, key to, climate change and, many aspects of ESG. So my final words, addressing climate risk is not about altruism. It's about securing the safety and future of a company, community, country, and world. Companies that successfully develop climate change strategies with an element of the just transition taken into account will not only reduce risk and ensure compliance, they will find opportunities to protect their reputation, brand, enhance resiliency, and achieve long-term profitability and value creation. Thank you for this opportunity to open this wonderful inaugural event, and I hope that everybody has a chance to really engage and collaborate and hopefully build communities of their own. Thank you, and I pass you back to Martin and Manya.
Thank you so much, Isabel. There was one question, a couple actually, but I'll go with the first one from, I think, Yolanda. Is there any site where we can see the data of the changes we are having in the world, such as the change in the sea level?
Oh, okay. I think you'd have to go to the UN site, the IPCC, which is the, and I know it's such a different acronym, but that's the climate change group for the UN. They would have up-to-date data on that.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think there was one more. How should we prioritize across environmental and social and other elements of sustainability? Do you think we have got this?
Oh,
go ahead, sorry.
For a second. Okay. Well, that's where the materiality assessment comes in, and ESG, unlike sustainability, ESG is focused on that investor consumer, the financial piece. It's a top-down method that a company needs to consider, approach, I should say, not a method. So I would, to prioritize, it would certainly be looking at each element, E, S, and G, and really understanding what the priorities are, but also looking at where they all link up. And that's where financing and governance comes into play. They would act as the glue for, let's say, environmental and social initiatives and programs. However, that's where I also suggest that one does what we call a materiality assessment, and those can be found on what is the Global Reporting Index website. They can be done through surveys. They can be done through external consultants to do a materiality assessment. And then also internally, this can be done through, a sustainability department or through even the finance department. So it's that, looking at what is key in the way of ESG to that company and plotting. So almost even doing a heat map might be a good idea of issues that are, of course, ESG focused, but are hot, medium, and cold.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Well, a round of applause, I would say virtual applause for Isabel. Thank you, especially for waking up so early to deliver this.
I will see you later on. You'll see me again, and please keep in mind those just transition quizzes.
Thank you so much. So moving on, we've got next Dr. Abdul Mohib from the IRM ESG SIG. Very short introduction to know who Abdul is he's an assistant director in risk assurance and projects at Peabody, but Abdul specializes in embedding the 3 lines of defense model to ensure effective risk assurance and governance frameworks. He's got experience in public protection throughout his career, from counterterrorism to food safety, rail transport, and public health. Most recently, he's dealing with social housing. So pretty varied experience, I would say. We're in good hands with Abdul. We said previously he's an active member of the IRM, and today he will be speaking to us on enterprise risk management influencing ESG and sustainability initiatives. So with that being said, I'll hand you over to Abdul. Dr. Abdul, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rania, and good afternoon, everybody. Can I just check? Can you hear me, Rania?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear and I can see you. Thank you.
Thanks for the kind introduction. Hi, everyone. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Martin. I'm a member of the Environment and Social Governance Special Interest Group of the Institute of Risk Management. And so I'm representing the SIG in collaboration with the Nuclear SIG today. And there are 7 of us in the committee. Hopefully you can see that in the slide in front of you. And the point to highlight is that the IRM's ESG SIG supports the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which we believe is linked to what we're trying to achieve. And the purpose of the SIG, ESG SIG, is to address ESG matters arising, taking a sector-wide and global governance perspective to help us all risk professionals. So if you need to reach out, we're all available. Our contact details are available on the IRM website within the special interest group. Please, may I have the next slide, Martin? So I want to discuss IRM influencing ESG and sustainability agenda across, in this scenario, across Peabody. Now, Peabody has an ambition, we have an ambition to become sustainable. And we have 3 strategic goals in relation to sustainability. And one of them is to become net zero carbon in a day-to-day operations by 2030. The second one is net zero carbon in rented stock by 2050. So if you're not aware, we are a social housing provider, and our stock is 104,000 units. And our third goal to be sustainable is to take up financial incentives to better lives of our residents. Now, there are some milestones. Without milestones, it would be quite difficult to achieve those strategic goals. Now, I want to just slightly move on to a specific topic, which is on the right-hand side of the slide, which says Thames Mead. Now, Thames Mead is a location within London, and it's the size of Thames Mead is 760 hectares, and it's the same size as central London. Now, 85% of the development land within Thames Mead is owned by Peabody, and we have a 29-year plan to develop homes in Thames Mead. But you may not be aware that Thames Mead is actually very low-lying and is right next to Thames, and therefore is significantly exposed to flooding risk. So whilst we have a group level sustainability strategy, we also have a specific sustainable strategy for our Thames Mead area. And we've listed some of the activities that are going on. If I may have the next slide, please. So when we talk about sustainable strategy, we often say, well, we've got a 3-year strategy, 5-year strategy, and there's activities happening across the group, but there's no clear coordination of where things are happening and how that then rolls up strategically to actually provide a measure of how we're performing, specifically how the threats of us not achieving sustainability or ESG commitments we've made. And therefore we've designed a risk governance structure, as you can see in front of you. And it starts off at the operational level. We have a risk champions forum, and then it moves up to executive committee, audit and risk committee, and board. Now you might think, well, this is no different. Yeah, it's a typical structure of a hierarchical structure of an organization. But what we've done is we've implemented terms of reference for those committees and boards to ensure that they have a particular risk responsibility to ensure that risks, threats, and opportunities are actually being assessed. But right now, we're going through another round of revising those terms of references for these committees and boards to ensure that sustainability and ESG is part of the current structure. Because what happens, a new terminology comes along, a new commitment comes along, new initiative comes along. ESG is obviously a new initiative globally. And what we don't want to do is create another committee which will review our progress against sustainability and ESG commitments. We want it to be all holistic, so everybody is on the journey and everybody can see what's happening. So right now, as we speak, we're going to the board, offering an opportunity for the governance structure for ESG and sustainability to be exactly similar to what you can see where our operational risks are reviewed, and as well as the strategic risks. If I may have this next slide, please. So, thank you, Martin. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of activities happening, but there's no clear holistic oversight or measurement of how we're actually performing. So from the risk perspective, the Enterprise Risk Management Framework, we proposed a strategic risk assessment. Now that means mapping out what are the activities that are happening in relation to climate change, in relation to ESG, in relation to sustainability. I'll come back to this slide. If I may have the next slide, please. So what we called controls map, we've done a controls map to say, okay, what are the controls? What are the activities that are happening that will make a real contribution either to manage the threats or harness the opportunity available to us? And on that note, how effective is it? Is it effective or partially effective or not effective at all with control owners, and then understanding what further actions or mitigations are required with the timeline? And based on that, we can go back to the previous slide and say, okay, let's do a strategic risk assessment. Previous slide, thank you, Martin. And as Isabel said earlier, there's so many terminologies, even coming to a common understanding of what we're trying to achieve. And therefore you'll see that our strategic risk title says sustainability, net zero, and carbon retrofitting. We want to ensure that we encapsulate all areas of what we're trying to achieve. That includes ESG, which we feel is wider than sustainability. And understanding and mapping our controls gives us an opportunity to say, okay, well, what is the net exposure with all the controls in place and the mitigations in place? What are the drivers? And more importantly, we've had a discussion about risk appetite. What, where are we? How are we cautious? Are we averse? Are we hungry? And what is the narrative with metrics that we can measure? And talking of metrics, we've also identified key risk indicators, which you can see at the bottom of this slide, which are reg-rated every quarter. And the purpose of that is that it tells the board whether we are actually trending worse or better or no change from quarter to quarter in working towards meeting our carbon retrofitting, net zero, and sustainability goals. And so this has really worked well, because now our audit and risk committee have a clear visual of what is happening, where we're moving to, and how we're performing in terms of specific measures in relation to key risk indicators that I've highlighted earlier. If we move on to the final slide, thank you, Martin. So what I've talked about so far is strategic risk assessment, but we all know at a strategic level, without the operational risks contributing and connecting the dots to the strategic initiatives, then we may never meet the strategic goals. So what we have is, we call directorate risk registers. You may call it operational risk registers. Now we've again done an analysis, and we've identified that there's actually very little threats or opportunities being managed from operationally for sustainability, for example, for equality, diversity, and inclusion, for customer experience, which are all important aspects of our strategic business plan. So we completed a survey asking our risk champions, well, are you aware of the fact that we have a sustainability strategy within the organization? If you are aware of it, are you impacted by it? And we took 5 key strategic initiatives, which you can see right in front of you, and asked the same question: are you aware of it? Are you impacted by it? And the summary of it is, everybody is aware that there are sustainability strategy, there's equality, diversity, inclusion initiatives, there's customer experience, there's regulatory expectations. But when we actually drill down to their risk management, this wasn't reflected. And so we're using this survey to say, look, you are clearly worried because you said you're impacted by it. You're aware that there's a strategic initiative that we all need to contribute towards. What are we doing? Where are the threats being managed? Where are the opportunities being managed? And through this dialogue, we've seen an enhanced engagement in people contributing to the initiatives and saying, okay, yeah, we are part of this. This is, and the latest is we're just about to develop a dashboard for sustainability and ESG, which can be presented to our audit and risk committee on a quarterly basis and our board on a 6-monthly basis. So while it's very difficult to understand or identify how risk management can contribute to strategic initiatives such as sustainability and ESG, believe it or not, that strategic risk assessment we've shown you has actually made huge progress in terms of holistic understanding of the controls in place and where we're moving to. So my suggestion would be is strategically aligning ourselves as risk professionals to see how can we help make progress through the risk lens, and just being a helping hand is a starting point. And on that note, I'll stop, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdul. That was very interesting. And you've actually answered one of the questions that was put about how can risk professionals do to make a, what can risk professionals do to make a difference? And you've answered that towards the end of your presentation. So thank you very much. I think we can move to the next one, unless there are any other questions.
Okay, so next up, we've got the IRM Energy and Renewable SIG. So I'm just going to quickly introduce you to Rick, an old friend and colleague of mine from when I worked in Abu Dhabi. So as you can see here, Rick is a seasoned professional with more than 15 years of experience in the risk management in the energy and infrastructure sectors, mostly in the Middle East. Rick is a fellow member of the IRM and a committee member of the IRM Energy and Renewables Group. I think I'll hand off now, stop sharing, and I'll hand off now to you, Rick, because I think you're going to pick up and kick off your presentation with Grant.
Yeah, that's right. Grant is actually going to share the presentation. Before that, I just want to introduce the Energy and Renewables SIG. So like I said, I am a committee member of that. Grant is actually the deputy chair. Our chair is Alexander Larsen, and the group is basically, I think right now we're about 7 or 8 people, and we're put together. We have monthly meetings where we talk about energy, and we're always trying to stick to that motto that we've used before, is fueling the debate. We have people from the oil and gas in that group. We have people from nuclear industry as well. We have people from the transmission industry. So we're all across the energy industry as a whole. Which is obviously why we're we're keen to participate in today's event. So appreciate the time that you get that we've been given for this. And Grant will basically kick it off with talking about our view on energy transition and how that affects our future, and obviously how that impacts the task that we have as risk managers. So over to you, Grant.
Thank you, Reich. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Rania. And I know a lot of effort's gone into this symposium today, so it's been a lot of hard work, and really good to see our colleagues and friends in the Nuclear Special Interest Group leading this great initiative. So I'd just like to start off with a slide, and it's got 2 curves here. Now, we all know that a curve can mean something, it can mean nothing, or it can indeed mean a lot. And that small one there on the left-hand side, it's got CO2 values there. And really what we've seen happen in the last, I suppose, couple of decades is a really big move towards meeting what a lot of the outcomes from the Paris Accord and subsequent, or prior accords and a lot of subsequent initiatives. And you've heard previous speakers talk on that a little bit. And that's really been driving a lot of change, in energy markets in particular. Now, it's accepted science really for most people that, that's where we're heading, and we really need to do something about abating our activities, particularly around carbon emissions. But prior to that, we actually undertook quite a lot of initiatives on getting SOx and NOx emissions out of power plants, for example. And so the natural follow-on has been really to start looking at carbon and start to look at the longer term climate impacts. And of course, whatever we do, and the energy industry really comes in for a lot of sometimes accolades and sometimes a lot of criticism, because what we seem to do, sometimes we're the good guys, sometimes we're the bad guys. But the energy transformation and transition that's been going on for some time now, and that has really ramped up in the last few years. For those who are electrical engineers out there, please pardon the pun about ramping things up. But it will certainly have mammoth implications, not just for our industry, but for a number of other industries and organisations, entire nations, and indeed the global community. And of course, we happily go along and we're following our climate change targets, our ESG initiatives. We're looking at the material ESG elements that we need to address. And of course, we start to think about how can we work towards these goals, and how are we going to transform entire industries? And I particularly single out oil and gas and also power generation as being two really big components within the global energy markets. And then geopolitical events come along, and we tend to start to think about prices and long-term viability. And then we start to think about other things that happen, demand shocks, supply shocks. And then, we look at things like COVID-19 that came for most of us completely out of the blue. It really blindsided industries. And we had that demand shock, and guess what? If we look on the right there, we see a little bit of the history of energy prices, particularly oil in this case, and it goes up and down. And when we hit COVID-19 about 2.5 years ago, when we were in the early stages of that, everyone went panic, panic, panic. Oil and gas, we actually reached negative prices for physical products in the US. So in other words, producers, instead of getting money for their oil and gas, actually had to pay people to take it off their hands. And we saw a record number of curtailments in terms of upstream activity in the global oil and gas sector. And so we sort of, at the time, a number of experts, in fact, our SIG, our energy SIG, ran an event with some global experts, and they said, well, we don't worry too much because energy markets always recover, and sure enough, they were correct about that. And so we see it goes up and down, and with that, we tend to find that energy companies change their focus. So what was one of the great unintended consequences of COVID-19? We'll all recall that, yes, the skies were cleaner, everything was great. We actually started to realize that we could have less reliance on fossil fuels, for example, and that sort of drove another few steps forward in terms of the energy transition. And it was a great time for many organizations to start thinking about how they can really ramp up their investment in a lot of the initiatives that they would need to deliver much cleaner and greener outcomes, and to really highlight and showcase their ESG credentials. And this is a little bit of research from Wood Mackenzie. I think it goes back about a year or so, but you'll see there, quadrants. We all love the old quadrants, and normally it's a top right one is where you want to be. That's just generally how we orient them. And those organizations that have really embraced this transformation, this transition, and invested heavily in refocusing and shifting their business models have been predominantly big oil and the larger companies. And so we ask the question, why is that? The truth is that in the energy sector, the cost of the transformation is so immense that it's really the larger organizations that are in a much better position to undertake these transformative initiatives. They're much more able to absorb higher levels of risk appetite in pursuing renewed objectives and restructuring their balance sheets. And of course, what we've seen, we have seen prices still fluctuate a little bit until we got to the end of last year, and I'll come back onto that in a moment. But when we were embarking on this great shift forward as a result of COVID and in the aftermath of it, on saying, yes, we can really start to move towards these ESG objectives and all of these targets much more easily now. We've all got a lot more confidence in what we do. The reality of supply chain risks started to kick in. And so we find in energy, just like most other things, technology is a great one. And automotive, we look at cars, we look at our mobile phones, everything else. We suddenly saw a lack of availability of semiconductors and other things because supply chains were very badly squeezed during and in the immediate period after COVID. And indeed, we still suffer major supply chain challenges. And so, of course, in doing that, the investments actually needed to be rethought. And the cost of some of the projects became much greater. So many more risks that organizations hadn't taken into consideration became reality. And of course, we start to get into a vicious cycle. And so we need to really start to think about where we go with ESG investments and where we really go with the energy transition and really what difference we can make. So I think that the truth is that the energy crisis as we now see it today, yet we're in a situation where people are thinking about, let's retreat back to what we know, because comfort and the things we know are an awfully great thing in times of hardship. And so right now we're looking at extremely high energy prices, record highs in some cases. We look at electricity prices around the continent and in the UK and even in the US and many other parts of the world. Forward electricity prices into next year are the highest that we've ever seen, ever. They're reaching astronomical levels. I won't cite some of the numbers because I think you read enough about them in the press anyway. But the truth of the matter is the geopolitical events of the Ukraine are just one small part of it. Because when we think back, let's go back to this time last year, October, November. And I remember we spoke about this at the Energy SIG quite a bit. We started to see massive hikes in gas prices. And so it's nothing new. And all that's happened this year with the events in Ukraine and the whole discussion around Europe about relying on Russian gas, we've actually seen the price and inflationary implications of that actually start to take root last year. And I suppose the message out of that is, had we started to go a little bit faster in terms of our strategic transformation, in terms of moving away from reliance on fossil fuels and what have you, well, perhaps we could have smoothed that curve a little bit more. And just to look at the investor element for a moment, and the first speaker, our keynote spoke about what investors look at and cited a few examples such as Exxon and others. Well, a lot of research has been done on this, and we actually find that ESG, yes, there are some benefits for investors, but you'll also notice on this nice little piece of information from our friends at PwC going back to last year, risk is also a very key theme in the whole energy transition and the whole ESG conversation. And so there's also one that I quite like here. If you look the bottom two boxes there on the right, directors who say that their ESG risks are well managed. Only 25% of them actually have confidence in the management of ESG risks. And so that's something to keep in mind when we start to talk about risk management and ESG, climate change, and all of these wonderful topics. Now, just one of the big pushes that we are seeing in the whole energy transformation and transition is a move towards greater electrification. So Reich and I put a few numbers up here to share with you, and these are all publicly available. They come from a range of different publications, but we are looking over the next 30 odd years or so, 20 odd years or so, really should check my maths, shouldn't I? Not good for an engineer, a 3 times increase in electrification. Now, it's very easy for us to say we're going to go with wind and we're going to go with solar and more hydro. But what do we do when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? I think what's happened now, and it's been exacerbated by current geopolitical events, is that we just can't rely on a single source. We've seen failures last winter, and again this last summer just gone by in Texas, for example, for different reasons. We've seen failings in other markets, Australia, a couple of years ago and again last year in terms of electricity capacity problems. And it's all linked to a rapid retirement of traditional sources of fossil fuel power generation technology. So I particularly cite coal-fired plants, for example. There's been a really quick move into getting rid of a lot of those, and also across Europe to retiring nuclear plants. And now what we're seeing is actually a resurgence in nuclear, because we're actually recognizing that it is indeed a very reliable and long-term source of renewable fuels. We've also highlighted another one here, hydrogen. And when we start to look at hydrogen and the level of activity there, hydrogen more and more is being looked towards as one of the key solutions in this whole ESG and climate change conversation. It aids electrification, it aids heating and a whole range of industrial processes. So hydrogen's also being closely looked at. And I think that there's a couple of lessons we learn from this. People are saying, as part of the big ESG drive, let's move away from fossil fuels. Anything that's hydrocarbons isn't good. We should be careful, or indeed we should back away from investing in those. When in fact, if we look at something like hydrogen, where do we get it from? And the clue is in the name, hydrocarbons. And so we can't just completely move away from relying on hydrocarbons and a whole range of other sources where we're talking about a cleaner, greener future. But of course, being good risk managers, we also look for opportunities, we look for innovation, we look for new ways of doing things. And so when we have these challenges, we then start to think about how can we innovate? And that's where risk management aligns beautifully with strategy. So we then start to think about new markets in CCS, so carbon capture and storage, for example, and how we can create entire new markets and new sources of revenue and what have you. So it's not all doom and gloom. And I'm finally going to leave you before I hand over to my colleague Reich with this. Just going back a few years now, people were talking about electric cars. They were going to be so much cheaper than petrol or diesel from about 2022. Battery costs were going to come down. But of course, what have we seen happen? We're now here, the reality of late last year and into this year, electric cars are a lot more expensive. We've also seen, as I said before, supply chain really have an impact on that, on those pricing sensitivities, as well as geopolitical events and other things. We've seen the ongoing challenges of COVID and China's zero COVID policy, for example, shutting down entire industries. So it's taking much, much longer to get critical components or even finished products out of China. And so we have to refocus those efforts. If we look at the battery technology, and again, a wonderful case study in ESG, we're still relying on lithium ion. And now there is a lot of research and development investment going on around ASSBs in lieu of lithium ion. These sorts of things, again, this is where we need to be more innovative, and we need to really transform the energy sector in ways that we probably didn't imagine 10 or 20 years ago. And so with gas prices at all-time highs, it really just illustrates the reason for diversification. But also, if we go back to our earlier graph about oil prices and gas prices that generally correlate with that, we should never entirely rule out the need to have a well-balanced portfolio if we're going to achieve a really cost-effective portfolio, particularly for electricity, and making energy affordable for everyone. Otherwise, we run the risk, pardon the pun, of eroding the prominence of the S in ESG. Because the S is not just about diversity, equity, and inclusion and all these other measures. It's also about doing good for nations, for economies, for local communities. It's also about people being able to avoid fuel poverty. And of course, the unintended consequences of mining for lithium, for cobalt, and many other things, which when we talk about our voracious appetite for semiconductors and our penchant for wanting EVs, they're the sorts of things that we're looking at right now. So if we're going to really think about ESG as part of our energy mix, we really need to take these things into account. Reich, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. So it's clear that we have a view of where we want to be, right, when it comes to the ESG principles and when it comes to, combating climate change. What Grant has shown is that it's not necessarily clear to everyone how we're going to get there. It's been demonstrated with the graph that some companies do more than others. That depends on their capital, etc. So we're all trying to solve the same problem here. We're all trying to help the world to become a better place. But I think what's clear to what is good to clarify is that there's different perspectives here. So kind of going back into the risk management scene here, but think about being a risk manager when you're within the national strategy setting bodies, you're creating policies, you're creating regulations. Some of the risks, some of the influences you'll be looking at are related to macroeconomic risks, related to inflation, obviously, again, related to macroeconomics. You're also looking at the market as it operates. You're looking at the operations, whether people are competitive, anti-competitive, and I think one of the most important ones is to make sure that the investment climate is actually positive. So these kind of things are what you should be looking at. I'm not quite sure if that actually is happening, and I don't know if risk management is implemented at this type of level. But just to demonstrate the different perspectives that we're having on the right side here, you can see what a private sector participant would look at in terms of risks. And as you can see, that's much narrower because we're only talking about market risk. We're talking about the investment risk, and obviously, whatever changes are being made, we want to make sure that we still have a good ROI from our projects, from our investments. And they can obviously be impacted by, the cost that come from the transition, reputational, that's a different story as well. And then when we talk about changes in legal and regulatory, so how are the changes from the left side of the field here, this particular one here, how are the changes coming through and how are they affecting me? So what we're really seeing is that we're really trying to get, to solve the same problem, but we're not thinking in the same way because, yes, so as from a national strategy point of view, you would be looking at a much bigger scale and a much bigger set of impacts. What we haven't seen is that there's a clear view of how we're going to get to that milestone, if you like, or to that state of being completely ESG or climate neutral, if you like. What we haven't seen is that there's risk oversight on either side of the coin here. We haven't seen particular good stewardship on some of these risk elements here. Meaningful insights. Now, that's not always the case. I mean, obviously there's quite a few organizations that do scenario planning, and I know that definitely happens on the national strategy part as well. But what we've and within our SIG, we've been discussing this quite a bit as well. But what we see is that we don't have a clear path for transition. We know where we want to get, but the path to get there is not clear. And if you want to manage that path, if you want to manage that path of transition, you need to know how you want to go. And only at that point you can actually change people, and you can change your you can even think about the risks that are coming in your direction. And right now, one of the things that, and what we're also want to talk about a little bit here, is that change in culture, because obviously all of the things that we've talked about so far, they don't really matter that much if the culture of the organization, the culture of your country, or the culture of the entire world is not, supporting. So Grant is the expert when it comes to culture, so he's going to talk a little bit more about that here.
Thanks, Rike. I remember the old definition of expert: an X is a has-been and a spurt is a drip under pressure. So Rike, as always, as the good Dutchman you are, a bit like us Aussies, very direct and on the money there. But it is true, just as we see with a lot of the planning and that organisations have undertaken for energy transition or for ESG initiatives, they really focus on the financial planning and a whole range of other things, but really don't start to tackle the challenges around culture. And culture is important, obviously, for our own organisations, but as Rike highlighted, it's also about the competing interests there of participants in marketplaces and also government departments and regulators. They really have different cultures, different perspectives and points of view. And I think, culture being so much at the heart of every organisation, extremely important that we get on top of that. And when we talk about culture from a risk management perspective, we know that if the culture's right, we have a much greater chance of success in managing our risks. Now, Rike and our colleagues, we always like to say, you can have all the processes, policies, beating people with sticks, and even people at the top talking about how great risk management is. But if we're not embedding a true culture that supports risk management, innovation, and strategy, then we're fighting a losing battle and risk management will fail. And I think with an unprecedented 3 generations all working now in the workplace at the same time, the cultural dynamics are significantly different to what they were even 10 years ago. And I think it creates even bigger challenges. We see millennials and Generation Z with all these expectations around doing good and wanting to change the world, blending in or having to sometimes conflict and sometimes work nicely with some of the wiser heads and some of the more experienced heads. And again, that's where risk management and culture are extremely important in helping to drive the change. And we put this in here because it's just we believe it's such an important element, and that organisations, particularly when we're talking about risk and we're talking about ESG and all of these issues, culture really needs to be front and centre and at the heart of everything. Right, back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, so where does that bring us? Onto the next slides, obviously. So where does that bring us as risk managers, right? So we've kind of tried to demonstrate that it's not necessarily clear how we're going to get to that state of being ESG compliant and living alongside the rest of the nature, the rest of our nature. So specifically, when you talk about working in commercial organizations, there's not much that you can do around, first of all, what's going to happen to the world in terms of climate change. But I think more importantly, related to our discussion today, is you can't really do much about the policies that are coming in, the changes that are coming in, and all of the other, global type of events that Grant has just talked about. So really, to tie it all back to the obviously to the Institute of Risk Management and to what we're trying to advocate here, organizational resilience is really the one and only way that you can prepare your organization for the future. So the future is not necessarily clear. How we're going to get there isn't necessarily clear. The vulnerabilities on the path, they're not necessarily clear. And the challenges that we're going to face is not necessarily clear. So what you want to have is an organization that's aware, that's ready, that can respond. And obviously we talk about agility. But really, risk management should enable the organization to, These are the type of events that could threaten us and the livelihood of our organization. And this is how we're going to make sure that we're ready to combat those and actually go forward. And this is what Grant has taught me for a while now, that we call that future proofing. So we really want to make sure that through risk management, that organizations are ready to ride the wave that is going to come. And we don't know from which side, we don't know where it's going to take us, but we know it's going to come. And the more resilient you are through risk management and through actually preparing yourself to respond to all kinds of changes, an organization will be able to ride that wave and hopefully help it get to the right direction. Any closing words you want to add, Grant, here, or shall we give it back to Martin?
I think we'll hand it back to everyone. So that was really great, right? Thanks.
Thank you very much, both of you. We have a couple of questions, so don't disappear just yet. First question, please. Are we prepared for energy shortages, blackouts? How seriously should people be working on this?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think we are. And I'll tell you why, if we talk about the very thing that we're discussing today, climate change. So what happens when we have these extreme conditions? Now, one of our SIG committee members just shared something with us yesterday we were talking about, and they were very much in one of the, we won't name names of organisations or countries, but one of the quite major economies in the world. And they said there's been quite a few scenarios, including severe weather scenarios, taken into account. And the consensus is that we probably won't experience these in that particular market. However, we do know that there have always been outlier events. We only need to look at Hurricane Ian in Florida recently. In fact, even the models had it landing somewhere near Fort Myers. In fact, it was a little bit further south, I think it was, from there. So even where they forecasted it would hit, they got that entirely wrong. But luckily, the government there in the state of Florida had prepared extremely well, and they had the agility to be able to pivot when they found out it had hit just a little bit away from where they expected it to. So I suppose my point is that I don't think we fully are. And again, it's because if you look at what the UK is doing, they're now preparing to have a lot of coal plants on standby. Now, I think here that this is the interesting conundrum that we can get into, and we talk about ESG and environmental targets and everything. What do you want to do? Do you want to ensure that people have good quality of life, that industry can continue to function for the greater good, so that economies can continue to grow? Because it's only when you have strong economies and economic activity that you can actually help to get people out of poverty, and you can also then continue to support the regulatory framework and all the legislation and incentives that are needed to move towards a much greater energy transition. But I really don't think any region or any one country or state anywhere in the world is really fully prepared yet. And for a number of reasons, I think we're a good few years away yet from avoiding blackouts. I don't know if Rike has anything to add. You may have a different view.
Not necessarily. So I think one of the key things to consider here is around the prioritization, right? So blackouts would mean that you stop households from getting electricity. What I do believe you see around with Europe right now is that some industries basically can't function anymore because the cost of energy is too high. So you can technically consider that a blackout already. It's not necessarily the same as being shut off, but it's in essence, it is the shortage of energy that's driving up the price. Hence, they cannot produce anymore. So I do agree with Grant here, is that we probably haven't seen the end of that yet. Yeah.
Thank you. One last question. Are energy companies embracing renewables?
Go ahead, Rike.
I was going to leave you to that. You have more experience with different energy companies than myself, just working for one here.
Okay, well, Rike's a big renewables guy. Where he works, it's a very big renewable investment. So, but they are, look, all of them have renewables to one extent or another. In fact, we're seeing in the UK generally a lot more investment in offshore and onshore wind. In Europe, there's 190 gigawatts of installed wind capacity onshore and offshore. There's significant plans to actually ramp that up even more, to more than double it over the next few years. Again, subject to supply chain risks and other things. Definitely, yes, that they are all moving into renewables in a number of ways. And that's also reflected in what we've seen in terms of the early retirement of a number of assets. Also look at some of the small scale nuclear investments in that, which I think Martin and others will be familiar with. There's a lot more investment activity happening now around small scale mini reactors and small reactors, and sort of, you know, getting technology moving in that direction. Because again, I'll come back to my point about, you know, when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, it's very, very hard to realise your renewables objectives. And with climate change as well, we're seeing a lot of drought, which means hydro is not as reliable as it once was. So indeed, they already do have, and they do have plans to keep investing in renewables. Probably will be some different types of renewables going forward.
Thank you very much, both of you. We'll be moving on to the next one then. Thank you. So our next presentation will be on global attitudes towards risks. That will be done by Matthew Walker from TÜV Süd. Matthew is a Director of Corporate Strategy and Business Transformation at TÜV Süd Nuclear Technologies. He has over 25 years experience providing advice to public and private sector organizations on maximizing value from their investment to acquire, create, improve, or maintain their corporate capabilities and assets. So he has seen quite a lot on different attitudes towards risks. With that being said, I will leave you in the hands of Matthew. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rania. I've just got 3 slides to present, and Martin, can you go back one? Because before we get into the detail of them, I just want to provide an overview of what's in each slide, and then we can get into the detail. So the first is going to set the scene in terms of the big picture situation that we all find ourselves in. And I'm going to leverage insights from a world risk poll, which was led by Lloyd's Register Foundation. And that poll explores the everyday risks people face in different countries. And it studies their perceptions and experiences of risk to their safety. If you've not heard of Lloyd's Register Foundation, they're a global charity whose mission is to make the world a safer place. And there's a link to the website in the slide that will follow. The second slide takes a really thin slice through a study which I was involved with as part of TÜV Süd, with help from some academics from the University of Cambridge. And we conducted a study in 2021 in response to an exam question set by Lloyd's Register, which asked, how do we ensure the future safety of critical infrastructure on which modern society relies? And the reason why I've included some material, which we'll go into shortly, from the findings of this study, is that it's pertinent to the situation which we find ourselves in today. And based on the findings, which were derived from 3 global roundtable events, which convened all sorts of practitioners in the management and maintenance of infrastructure, it calls out some specific questions to all actors who influence the future provision of critical infrastructure. And I see the body of capabilities which make up the Institute of Risk Management as one of those groups of influencers. Therefore, I thought it appropriate and opportune to share a slice of that study with you today. Encourage you to take a deeper dive into the study findings and to think about the actions which you could take to help shape a better world. Actions which you could take as a consumer, some of you possibly prosumers, thought leaders and risk practitioners. And then that leads us, it's going to lead us into the third slide, which goes straight to the heart of attempting to answer the question which Martin set me, which was, how can we use risk management to inform climate change discussion and support progress? And I have 3 themes which I'll present to you. And I propose possible ways under these themes in which you could help to make a difference. All 3 involve the application of nudge theory. And that's using the power of influencing behavior of others to guide informed choices. Nudging is not a reminder to do something, nor is it a call to action. Rather, it provides others with a feeling of agency and empowerment, hopefully to do the right thing. So in case of our situation, to do the right thing for our planet today for the benefit of tomorrow. And I think there are some standard levers which we can all pull. For example, raising awareness, which is what we're doing today, to help influence values and behaviours. Education to help persuade and motivate a change. And role modelling and facilitation to help sustain a new way of doing things. I was reticent to begin with when putting the slide together, not knowing how behavioural science would sit amongst an audience of risk practitioners, where my preconception, right or wrong, of a risk practitioner's persona is someone that's very analytical and probabilistic. And to be candid with you, I've been biased in terms of what I think the persona of a risk practitioner is by the character of Ben Stiller in a film, I think it was 2004, called Along Came Polly. And the storyline was about a risk practitioner, Ben Stiller, who is so aware of the risks inherent in all of the situations that he comes across that he's unable to risk anything. Now, if you've not seen the film, then spoiler alert, the ending involves nudity on a beach, aka risk taking. But I'd just like to make it clear that I'm not advocating that you all do skinny dipping. So, Martin, first slide, please. There's quite a bit on here, but I think the key message that I want to land is that I see the predictability of our world is changing. And I see that change and that unpredictability manifest itself through things that I hope we can all see. Wildfires in California and in Europe, a third of Pakistan underwater as a result of flooding, war in Europe, and the outbreak of a pandemic disease. And there are plenty more examples. And I think the effects of these events, we're feeling them. All of us are feeling them, whether that's directly or indirectly through market forces. In the roundtable events which I ran with Tuf Surd on the critical infrastructure study, with safety practitioners, it was noted that people's attitudes to risks are changing. And I think there is an argument that our attitudes to the safety of infrastructure have been shaped largely by singular extreme events, events within individual infrastructure systems, for example, rail crashes or bridge collapses. But I think the resilience of our infrastructure to adapt to shocks and stresses as a result of climate change, for example, is under enormous pressure. And that is not only because of the way our infrastructure is evolving into an interconnected system of systems, and it's therefore more susceptible to cascade failure, for example, through cyber attacks, but it's also because climate change is resulting in more frequent and more extreme pressures, and it's affecting multiple systems, not single systems. I think this argument correlates with some of the high-level insights from Lloyd's Registered Risk Poll, namely the perceptions and experiences of people. I think they interviewed about 125,000 people across the globe. Their perceptions of experience of serious harm from severe weather has significantly increased over the past 3 years. And there's a higher experience of disasters in countries with low resilience. There's a wealth of information and data behind these headlines, and Lloyd's Register have issued the first of 2 of 4 studies and data releases, which is all available for public consultation. And there's a link on this page to their website. If the topics are of interest to you, I do encourage you to take a closer look. Martin, can you flick us onto slide 2? Thank you. So this slide builds on all of the issues I've just mentioned. What was most notable out of the Tufts study on critical infrastructure, in that all of the roundtable events, there was a common and an impassioned view that to address a net zero ambition, clean energy solutions needed to be deployed at a rate and scale that the world has never seen before. And given the need to address the implications of climate change are time critical, an approach to making a pragmatic trade between safety and other attributes of sustainability is going to be essential if we've got any chance of trying to keep 1.5 alive. And I personally believe that this can't be achieved with conservatism or an ideology that the West is best and emerging economies should follow a global standard. Whilst the greatest emitters, I think, per capita of greenhouse gases are developed countries, some of the most pressing challenges exist in developing countries, where the headroom for greenhouse gas emissions is really relatively small, and where their infrastructure policy, regulation standards and their capabilities are very embryonic. And I think it's because of these geographical variations in capabilities, safety culture, that the challenge to rapidly roll out new clean energy solutions is not going to be addressed by a one-size-fits-all solution or a one-size-fits-all approach. I think regional variations rather than global normalization looks to be inevitable, and we need to get comfortable with this situation. Martin, can you flick to the last slide? Thank you. So my last slide is structured around nudging 3 groups of actors, influencers, and that's consumers, policymakers, funders, insurers, and the third group, philanthropists and social entrepreneurs. Dealing with each of these columns from left to right, I believe that nudging consumer behavior will become absolutely pivotal to improving the resilience of our infrastructure and the ability for us to balance the built environment against planetary health. And we need to get better at managing demand, reducing the scale and complexity of the infrastructure that we need. And we need to get a whole lot better at providing transparency, educating end users and raising their interest in understanding that certainty of price for infrastructure, the amount we pay for it, is traded with the reliability and performance of that infrastructure. And within that trade is better management of demand. I also believe that policymakers, funders, insurers need to get comfortable with 3 things. Firstly, understanding and embracing different risk appetites across the globe. Secondly, the ideology of global standardization of approaches to safety in our infrastructure will prevent us from keeping 1.5 alive. And thirdly, agreeing a consistent set of principles to invest and to be involved in investment decision making, in particular in developing countries. And we need to move away from the world saying to developing countries, this is what we've got, this is what we can sell you, towards a more customer focused approach. That is, what is appropriate and applicable to address your needs. Thirdly and finally, the third column about social entrepreneurs and philanthropists. I see our world is running at a pace which means the horizon is constantly changing. So tomorrow's future is rapidly transitioning in today's reality. And I think we're heading towards a fifth industrial revolution, which is increasingly looking like it'll be characterized by a coming together of not just industrialists and technologists, but also social entrepreneurs and philanthropists. This sounds like a healthy mix, and I'm sure it will be, but it's going to require some nudging from risk practitioners who I can hope provide some balanced advice to all of those influencers. And that balanced advice might occasionally involve some skinny dipping. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I've got one question for you, please. It's, if there was one message we wanted to communicate to policymakers, what would it be?
I think the one message to policymakers all over the world is to ditch the ideology about normalization, in particular on standards in the delivery of infrastructure. I think we've got to come to terms with the fact that developing countries are at most need, because they're feeling it more than the developed world in terms of the impact, the direct impact of climate change, and they need help, and that help isn't going to come from policymakers insisting that developing countries need to meet the same standards that the developed world has arrived at over the last series of decades. So that would be my message to policymakers. Ditch the idea of global normalization, adopt the fact that regional variation is what we need if we're going to have clean energy solutions rolled out rapidly across the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthew. We're going to move on to our last presentation, which is pretty exciting title. It's been in the news recently, Fusion Energy and its part in building a sustainable future. This will be presented by Nicola Barber. She's part of the IRM Nuclear SIG. Nicola is the head of risk and assurance and executive member of the UK Atomic Energy Authority, and is also a certified member of the Institute of Risk Management. She has worked in a number of disciplines within the nuclear industry for the last 16 years, including leading on assurance, risk, and project controls. In her most recent previous role as head of risk for Magnox. So very exciting. I'll leave it over to you, Nicola. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rania. Could I have my first slide, please? Right. Thank you for the introduction.
Oh, you've gone on mute, Nicola. Let's try once more.
No, sorry. I touched my head.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Rania. I just wanted to add that I've been a member of the IRM Nuclear Special Interest Group, which has been together for several years to address the varied challenges within the nuclear industry. Martin and Rania are also members, and Catherine McLaughlin from Sellafield is our chair, and we also have a wider membership across the NDA estate. So we've done a lot of good work addressing the challenges in the nuclear industry and our risk management approach to that. And we're really glad to be here today to represent the nuclear SIG in our first cross-industry special interest group event. I'm here today to talk about the work we're doing in developing fusion power and how the development and commercialization of that fusion power will help meet future energy needs and help to sustain low carbon sources of energy in the future. And I'm also going to talk about our sustainability strategy and goals that we're undertaking here at UKAEA. Could I have the next slide, please? So currently, 80% of our world's energy comes from fossil fuels. And last year we were set the target by government that all of our UK electricity would come from clean sources by 2035. And we've also been set the target, of course, of a net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. However, we won't have fusion ready by then, as the world will not stop in 2035 or 2050. So renewables and nuclear fission will play a large part in meeting the world's energy needs. However, alone, it will not be enough. The world's energy demand is still growing, and it's estimated to be 2 or 3 times greater by the year 2050. And the world population is also forecast to increase from 8 billion to 11 billion by the end of the century. So we need low carbon energy sources to meet that demand, not just for decades or for 2050, but for the millennia. So fusion is just one of the few long-term answers in moving the energy mix away from fossil fuels. We should, of course, use renewables wherever we can, and we've spoken about that. And I know Grant mentioned earlier that those are dependent often on having sun or wind, so they don't work everywhere. However, fusion is one of the solutions where fuel is readily available, and it would work without being dependent on the sun or the wind. And I'll go on to explain a bit further how we intend to achieve powering the grid through fusion power for future generations. So fusion promises to be a safe, low carbon and sustainable part of the world's future energy supply. And we believe that fusion energy can be environmentally responsible as part of the world's energy supply in the second half of this century. However, there's big challenges to overcome to deliver that. Even with massive investment, there are big hurdles to overcome, including technical challenges. The government, however, is backing fusion, and in the last year they have published their strategy on nuclear fusion, and we've been included and mentioned in the energy bill this year. Could I have the next slide, please? We want to make the world a better place and allow everyone access to sustainable energy through fusion energy. But don't just take my word for it. In Stephen Hawking's last book, he was asked, what world-changing idea, small or big, would you like to see implemented by humanity? And he responded, this is easy, that he would like to see the development of fusion power to give an unlimited supply of clean energy. Could I have the next slide, please, Rania? So there's lots of benefits of fusion. One being that the fusion process is carbon-free at the point of generation and produces only safe helium emissions. It's also very safe. There is no chain reaction. Fusion is not based on a chain reaction, as fission would be, and it needs specific conditions of immense heat and pressure to maintain fusion for it to occur. Therefore, if there were any technical problems, such as an earthquake or an event, a fusion facility would be immediately switched off. There would be no chain reaction and the process would stop within a second. And it's also reliable. Fusion energy, as I've said, does not depend on factors such as the wind or the sun, so it's continuously deployable at the point of need. It's sustainable, so the fuel used in fusion reactions are inexhaustible. Those fuels are typically deuterium, which is readily extracted from seawater, so it's readily available, and tritium, which is produced using lithium. We currently, I mean, although tritium is naturally occurring, it's very scarce on Earth. So we do currently 1 kilogram of tritium would be enough to power a fusion power plant. And we currently obtain that via fission reactors, but in future design of fusion power plants, that capability will be inbuilt within the fusion power plant to have a breeding tritium facility. Another benefit is that fusion provides more energy per gram of fuel than any other process that can be achieved on Earth. So we need to do this, we need to make it happen. It also has a shorter waste legacy. So fusion power plants are not expected to produce very long, high-level radioactive waste that can be associated with fission. And most of our waste material from the fusion power plant is likely to be low level. And that means it can be disposed within 100 years of the machine's shutdown. Could I have the next slide, please, Rania? This slide here just shows how energy is produced. I'm not going to go into much detail here. I'm not a scientist, and I'm probably pitching to the wrong audience for that as well. But fusion powers the universe. It's within our sun and with our stars, so it's all around us. So our challenge is to copy that process for cleaner energy here on Earth, and that is our aim here at UKAEA for fusion research. So what is fusion, or rather, how do we generate that? So we take the deuterium and the tritium, which are the heavy isotopes of hydrogen, and we combine them to create helium, a neutron, and a huge release of energy. So whereas fission splits an atom into two smaller ones, the opposite is true for fusion. We are fusing lighter atoms to produce a larger, heavier atom. And in that process, we release that fusion energy. And the conditions needed to fuse those atoms is called a plasma, which is the fourth state of matter, which is quite hard to achieve and requires huge temperatures, which takes me on to my next slide. Thanks, Rania. So an interesting fact, which I don't think I was aware of till I worked here at UKAEA, is that the hottest place in our solar system is not the sun, as you might think, but it is in fact here in Culham at our UKAEA site, which is a small village in Oxfordshire. And here we house a vast reactor, and within that reactor, we have one of the largest nuclear fusion experiments in the world, which is JET, which is our joint European torus that we operate on behalf of Eurofusion. And when JET is operating, temperatures here can reach 150 million degrees, which is 10 times hotter than the center of the sun. So confining plasma is one of our biggest challenges to replicate that energy on Earth. And within our machine here, JET, last year at UKAEA, we set a world record by producing 59 megajoules of sustained energy through fusion. Now, that's not a huge amount. In fact, it's only enough to power around 3 tumble dryer cycles. However, as far as humanity is concerned, it's a scientific breakthrough and proof that fusion is a very big deal indeed, because we've proven the science. So the next challenge is how we can sustain that and drive the pathway to making that commercial. However, there's a big but. It's really, really hard to achieve because we do not have the benefits of the gravity of the sun and the density of that. So we have to make the fuel even more energetic. And to do that, that's why we need temperatures 10 times higher than the sun. And we have to have intense pressure within our machine. And we need to produce that fusion energy within the machine and sustain that for a sustained period to be able to plug that energy longer term into the power grid. Could I have the next slide, please? So how are we going to do that? It's a joint collaboration. We have a UK fusion strategy. We're engaging with international collaborations, both around the world. We're involved in the ITER project, which is a large fusion experiment in the south of France, along with 35 nations. And we have collaborations here in the UK as well. So it's very much a world effort, not a UKAA effort. So we're working collaboratively in the private sector as well, and internationally to achieve this. And we also have a public-private partnership, or it will be in the future, with an announcement of our new STEP facility, which is the spherical tokamak for energy production. We announced our site last week, which is in West Burton in North Nottinghamshire, where we will be building a prototype, spherical tokamak prototype, to prove that we can put energy on the grid. So that will be one of the first prototypes of its kind in the world. It won't be ready until 2040 or within that sort of time frame. We're currently in the concept design phase, but it will bring thousands of jobs to the fusion industry, and it will lead the way as the pathway to commercializing fusion in the future. Could I have the next slide, please? So that's what I was going to say really around our fusion strategy and the work we're doing here at UKAEA. And I just wanted to also talk about what we're doing actually now, because fusion will not impact our net zero targets within the next few decades. It should do, hopefully by the end of this century. But what are we doing here now to contribute to that net zero target? So we published our sustainability strategy recently, which is available on a government website, which I think the link is in the next slide. But really that covers our 3 top sustainability goals. So I agree with Isabel's comments earlier that our sustainability strategy to be successful needs all key elements of our ESG priorities embedded, not just environmental. So at all levels of our business, we need the right people being involved with the social aspect of ESG, as well as having responsibility at all levels within our organisation in delivering our sustainability strategy. So that's from having leadership buy-in right through our whole organisation here, and we need the right governance with that appropriate leadership buy-in and the technical experts involved to deliver our strategy. So our 3 top strategic sustainability goals are around new buildings and infrastructure, upgrading our existing estate, and driving sustainability through our supply chain. Could I have the next slide, please, Rania? So we've committed to designing and constructing any new buildings from next year, from January, with a strong focus on sustainability by achieving a BREEAM status at the highest level, at the excellence level. We currently already work towards that industry standard, which is the design rating in operational carbon emissions. So we already achieve good or very good status for our existing estate, but we want to achieve more than that and aim for the maximum excellence for our new buildings in terms of sustainability. So, and also as part of our new strategy, we're improving and upgrading the existing estate. So that's things like installing solar, upgrading our insulation, having enough car charging facilities on site, changing our kitchen facilities to be all electric, and creating more green space. And so there's lots of work already underway in upgrading our existing estate here. So we're committed to delivering our research in an energy efficient manner to minimise the impact we have on the environment. And we're striving to deliver the principles of our environmental sustainability in all of our operations. And that actually brings me to the end of what I was going to cover. I mean, the next slide here is just if you're interested in learning more of the work we're doing here at UKAEA, please have a look at this link here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I've got a couple of questions for you, please, if you would stick around a bit more. Well, we've got the Q&A after this anyway, but so for our first question, please, is what is the level of risk exposure in a fusion power plant, and are there any comparators?
Okay, so the risks in a fusion power plant, I think, are not to the same level that you would expect in a fission power plant reactor. That we do have some risks, particularly around the use of tritium. But we're building within the design of our power plants the containment that is needed to prevent any release to the environment. But yes, tritium is probably our biggest risk. We also have other industrial and radiation hazards, which are more comparable to industries such as the oil and gas or chemical industries, rather than to the fission industry. So we've undertaken quite a lot of hypothetical analysis and accident scenario analysis on what those hazards look like. We had the green paper published this year, which was the government fusion strategy paper, and that went out to consultation to decide how we should be regulated in the future for our future fusion power plants. And it was decided.
Oops, you've gone on mute.
So the output of that consultation was that the Environment Agency and HSE, the Health and Safety Executive here in the UK, will continue to be our regulators, as we do not meet the level of hazard needed to that applies in the licensed condition site. So yes, there are obviously certain hazards and some radioactive waste that will need to be managed, but as I mentioned earlier on, that's expected to be at low level, not high level waste.
Thank you. And then the second question was, what are the risks to being able to deliver the UKAE sustainability strategy?
Yes, we've recently undertaken quite a bit of work in defining what our risks are, because it's all very well having the goals and delivering them and communicating them through our organisation, but obviously we need buy-in, and there may be a degree of some of that may be a little outside our control, like how do we ensure that our sustainability strategy is fed through our supply chain, for example, much further down the supply chain where we might not have visibility. We are mitigating that to that particular risk to the best of our ability in training our contract managers and ensuring as part of our contract process we are sharing our sustainability goals and standards with all of those that we engage with in our supply chain. So other risks might be that our sustainability enhancement is too late and retrospective, and enhancements may be too expensive to deliver a return on investment in our proposed timescale. Some of our sustainability goals may not align with some of our other benefits, although we have ensured that our sustainability goals are in sync with both BEI's sustainability goals and also our own mission and goals here at UKAEA. Also, until the new buildings are actually built, even though we intend to meet the BREEAM standards, new buildings may not reach the full sustainability potential. There may be other sort of external influences at play there. So the challenge is to deliver our sustainability strategy and to deliver it, and we're quite in early stages of that, but we do have a dedicated team and a very strong leadership focus on meeting the sustainability strategy goals.
Thank you. One more popped out for Nicola. If we imagine future commercial fusion plants, how specialist are the skills required? Could we really have enough expertise to change the global energy mix?
I think we will have the skills through the supply chain. It's obviously a whole new world and will be. But a lot of skills are transferable. Just for example, we have already within our UKA, we employ people from other industries, from engineering and technical backgrounds, and that they're able to learn. And obviously where research and science community here as well. So there's a huge amount of value to be gained, not just in the UK, but worldwide, as we all endeavour on our strategy for fusion. So yes, I think most skills will be transferable, of course, but there's still that element of the unknown. So at this stage, we're building our design concept design for the spherical tokamak that I talked about to be sited in the north. But until we get further down that design route, of course that design may change as that design matures later on down the line, and that will drive the type of skills that we will need.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It's pretty extraordinary. We're talking about fusion, very science fiction like we would be seeing in Star Trek movies and such. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Well, that concludes our session today. We're gonna be moving to our main Q&A. Martin, if you would come out. Martin has kindly helped with the slides. So
Okay, so we've had some quick questions that were pertinent to all the presentations from everyone. Thank you very much, everyone, for making those presentations. We planned on having a broader general question and answer session to try and bring together the presenters and any questions that they might well have. We've not had many questions come through in the chat. Please put your questions into the chat pane.
I have a few. I was DM'd, so I have
you've
a few
got them
more.
directly.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's maybe
great.
that's why.
Do you want to get the ball rolling then, Rania? Get us
Yes,
started on those questions so the presenters can come through with their answers.
Yes. So I've got one. I got for Matthew. Does accepting different standards lead to a risk that we tolerate the developed world transferring the risk of higher hazard industries to developing countries? I'm thinking of scenarios like Bhopal in India. I can repeat the question.
No, you're okay. You're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. In short, a direct answer. Yes, it does increase the risk, but I think herein lies the challenge. To me, there's a bigger risk associated with, frankly, our world frying in the next 20 years if we don't address a global rollout of clean energy solutions. So let's not forget that macro risk and put the risk associated with regional variations in standards in the context of that macro risk. And for sure, we've got to figure out a way that we don't create a rod for our own backs or a situation in 10, 15 years time that we're going to regret. But frankly, we've got to get on with helping developing countries. And I think that goes beyond just providing them with finance. I believe all of the participants at the various COP events have committed to billions of pounds to developing countries, but we've also got to commit to providing them with capabilities to upskill them, which will help with de-risking the issues associated with regional variations in standards. So I hope whoever raised that question, that answer's good enough for them.
Hope so. We'll take silence as golden. So the next question. The next question would be I have it for Grant here. So currently the cost of energy is increasing and driving investment in efficiency and alternative sources. How volatile is this? Is this likely to be a continuing trend? I can repeat it.
Yeah, please, yeah, just to give me a little bit of time to give a
Sorry.
Thank you, Rani.
Thinking time.
So currently the cost of energy is increasing and driving investment in efficiency and alternative sources. How volatile is this? Is this likely to be a continuing trend?
Yeah. So when we say volatile, we think about that, yeah, that shift in prices. And I think the clever thing to do is to make hay while the sun shines, as the old saying goes. So right now is the time to invest. But obviously, when you do really good, strong, risk-based planning, that helps to overcome a lot of those volatilities. So what you'll be factoring in are a number of risks and a high level of uncertainty in many cases, which should actually help to ensure that the future price, and I think this is the core of the question, is what will those investments look like and what will the cost competitive nature of those be like down the track? And if we look at some of the work done in the last probably 10 years especially, what's happened with wind turbines, to use that as an exemplar, that we've gone up and up and up in size relatively quickly. And actually the cost now that many wind farm projects where they've been subject to bid, and I cite a couple of the ones in the Netherlands and also the UK in the last 4 or 5 years, a number of companies have actually bid for those and won them without the need for any government subsidies. And so we're seeing efficiency improvements, we're seeing better ways of doing things, but as well as a real risk-based approach being taken. And when you have the combination of those things, there's no reason to suspect that we should be subjected to excessively high energy prices in the future. But the really big challenge, though, right now is to have a coherent strategy and stick with it rather than knee-jerk reactions. And I think that's where organisations really need to have nerves of steel and get their risk management right. And if they can do that, they're 99.9% of the way there to succeeding. Thanks for the question. It's great.
No worries. I've got one more. It's directly addressed to you, and then some others that are I'll just throw them. There's no name to them, so anyone can chip in. How does the current energy security situation create threats and or opportunities?
Yeah, that's a good one. So create threats. I think well, look what happened with Nord Stream with the pipeline. So we just see an example there of something has gone badly wrong there. There's been some nefarious activity happening in Nord Stream. So it's energy has always been political in nature, and many people would argue that over decades and decades, there's been wars fought over oil and all sorts of things. So definitely there's a lot more yet. There's a lot more that we're yet to see happen. So what was the second part of the question, please, Rania? It was opportunities, wasn't it? So
and or opportunities.
Yeah, and so opportunities, again, it's going to be this drive around alternative technologies. That's really going to be the big thing, at least from my point of view. And we're seeing that start to happen already. But again, we've always got to have a risk management mindset around that, because suddenly these things become very valuable, and particularly if we have to go into different parts of the world to try and find opportunities to do things, if we don't have very strong governance and very strong rule of law, then we'll start to face a whole new range of risks, or the same risks we've seen elsewhere, but in new operating environments. So again, I sort of don't want to just say, hey, risk management solves everything, but certainly very sound risk management practices go a long way to mitigating the threats and also helping us to exploit the opportunities.
Thank you very much. I hope that answered the question.
I hope so too. I don't mind.
So the next few questions I have, they don't have a name attached to them, so free for all, basically. I have one here from, I think it's from Alan. Apologies, I'm not very Zoom efficient. I'm more of a Teams person. Anyway, given the culture changes required to address climate change, but also ED&I awareness of well-being, safety, etc., how can we ensure people can cope with all we are asking of them? Does anyone want to pick this one up?
I'm happy to start by making a very high level statement, it starts with leadership and tone from the top. Yeah, and we say this often in risk management, but we also say it. I've held a number of senior roles over the years in large companies, and sometimes you see bad behavior and bad cultures perpetuated, but it's the managers and leaders that actually stand up and create a really great working environment. They're the ones that continue to deliver really strong results, and people who have a really good attitude towards their work, people who are motivated to come in and give their absolute best, and to, most importantly, make really good, sound decisions. And the other aspect of it as well, and it's something that's really been amplified in the aftermath of COVID-19, has been mental health. And I think we've all got to, you know, play our parts as leaders and managers and as risk managers in looking out for a lot of the signs and how we can improve mental wellness in the workplace. Because everyone has mental health. It's like physical health, and it can be good or bad. And you know, as long as we're aware of people's state of mind, that's a very big part of helping to form the right culture, therefore the right behaviour, and to get the best outcomes.
Thank you, Grant. Another question I have is, what have we learned? Are we more prepared, more resilient to all risks now, or just the next flu pandemic? Anyone who wants to pick it up? It's free for all.
I can answer. I mean, I don't think that's something you can answer, to be honest, but I can give you my thoughts. So where we are, obviously, you know, everybody understands that we've kind of, wouldn't say moved past it completely, but we've gone a long way in combating the coronavirus. I think companies that haven't managed well, we won't see them again. The ones that have survived, they hopefully learn lessons from it. I do think overall, and this does kind of relate to what we were talking about during our particular presentation, is, you know, is it going to be the same, right? Is the next challenge going to be the same size? Is it going to be the same type? Is it going to be the same? We don't know. So I think what I do hope, and that's what I'm saying, I'm not really answering the question, but I do hope that people realize that when we start purposely changing things like our energy supply, which is basically it's throughout the entire, it's the fabric basically of our current society. If we are purposely changing significant things there, we should be ready for all kinds of effects that we not necessarily haven't anticipated. So that's why, again, you know, risk management, especially in the shape of strategic risk management, creating a robust and resilient organization. Hopefully, you know, we don't actually have to worry about the next, because we are robust enough to be able to conquer the majority of the challenges that will be thrown at us.
Thank you, Rick. Another one here, and I might try and translate it a bit. In terms of longer term climatic risks, 50, 100 years from now, tipping points increasingly come into play as temperature increase to around 4 degrees plus scenarios, which are relatively likely over these timeframes. Given that this takes climatic impacts well beyond what we see today, is this something that organizations should be taking into account now, or does risk management not typically look over these timeframes? I believe the question here is if risk management is taking in consideration climate change risk in terms of the effects of going 4 degrees over, so climate change risk. This is what the question is, I think. If I'm getting this wrong, please do correct me in the chat, or you can ask the question yourself. You can unmute. Feel free for it. But this is what I think the question is.
Matthew, is that one that will be best suited by you? Because I know you had the 1.5 in your presentation.
Yeah, I'll have a go at it.
So if we're taking in climate change, and I think also, sorry, Matthew, I think it also, part of it is if we're taking a long horizon view in risk management. Sorry.
So again, to answer it directly, should we be considering that sort of scenario? Should organizations be considering that sort of scenario? Then I think the answer is yes. successful organizations are the ones in my mind that are smart with respect to applying foresight methodologies to explore the implications of different plausible futures. And frankly, the way we're going at the moment, 4 degrees to me is a plausible future. I sincerely hope it isn't realized, but I think successful organizations, they do look at plausible futures. They think about the implications of those futures, and they start to prepare for them, not necessarily take immediate action, but think about the consequences for their organization, their people, their supply chain, their customers. So in short, the answer is yes, we should be looking at what 4 degrees looks like.
Thank you, Matthew.
Do you think we're doing a good enough job, Matthew?
A good enough job at keeping 1.5 alive?
Yeah, this foresight.
It's it's difficult for me to answer that. I mean, I based on the experience that I have in terms of the organizations that I work with over the past 25 years, then I've seen a growing use and adoption of foresight techniques to influence corporate strategy. Could we do more of it? Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Rania, do you have any more?
2 more. So okay, one. How much do risk managers engage in and influence foresight tools?
Depends on the organization. A lot of dynamics there. Maybe Reich wants to contribute to that if he can, if he wants to, I don't know. But that's my experience. Every organization is different. Some have a really proactive approach to risk. Others less so. Others think it's a bit more, we'll just, stumble on by. We've got a risk management function, tick the box. Reich, what's your thoughts?
No, I totally agree. It really depends on the type of organization. If you look at a perfect organization, you would want the risk manager to be all over that, right? And I guess that you can even relate that to the previous question, right? So if you're not considering the fact that, the climate might impact you and your operations, even simple things, like a facility location could be in a flood-prone area, which right now is manageable, but let's say in 15 years from now, it's going to be a problem. You should consider those type of risks. So, like I said, I think in a perfect organization, these kind of things, like okay, what kind of scenarios are we looking at? Worst case, best case type of considerations in the horizon scanning, right? So what should we be looking at? And I guess that all goes into strategic decision making, right? So would we make that decision on what we know right now? And does that change? Do we make that decision on the uncertainties that we're not quite sure of? So I do hope in a perfect organization that definitely in the toolbox of the risk manager, yeah.
Thank you. Should companies prepare plans for unplanned loss of power events or for restriction on demand? And yeah, I think this ties with another question.
Yes.
So I'll just leave this for now and put the second question, which comes more as a A-B type of thing. Oh, is that the answer? Yes.
As easy as that, in my opinion, yeah.
So another question which kind of ties in with this one is, many years ago, I heard Kate Addy speak about going to war-torn places. The loss of power was the tipping point for the failure of normal society. What can we do to prepare better for these risks? Free for all.
We seem to have an obsession with power cuts.
Yeah, an unhealthy one.
Mm.
I think it comes down to the rule of law and things like that as well, and how well governed entire countries are. That's a big part of it, because where you see a lot of corruption and you see a lot of extractive type economic policies, that certainly doesn't help, and that's where you tend to experience these things.
Rania,
Yes.
Sorry, Rania, there's an interesting headline from LRS World Risk Poll on A Resilient World, and through its survey, it's found that a third of the world's population would survive for less than a month with no income. I find that statistic quite shocking. And it's the extreme end of, you know, what happens if the lights go out. But I think from my own personal, speaking from my own personal experience, then, you know, I think we've become very complacent in terms of expecting the light to come on when we press the switch, expecting the heating to come on in the morning and the evening. And I think we've also become very complacent in terms of appreciating how much those things cost, both to our individual purses, but also in terms of planetary health. So I
guess
think
developed worlds is more at risk in terms if the lights go off, rather than third world countries, which are not as used to all the privileges that we have. Everything switches on when we want to in the West. And we're very, very dependent on a lot of machineries, whereas in other less fortunate countries, they're not. And they maintain a different lifestyle, which if the lights go out, it doesn't matter for them because they don't have that privilege.
I think it sounds, this is going to sound such a generalization, but I think for many societies in the developing world, their level of preparedness is probably much better. It's probably much better than my own. You know, I haven't got any candles in the cupboard if the lights go out, because I just assume they're going to be on. I think Nicola's trying to
sorry. Yeah, and I was just going to say I totally agree with what you're saying, but I think there is a slight tide of change here, because I mean one of our very top risks here, which I think is quite common for most of us, is obviously the rising energy prices and the effect of the Ukraine war through our supply chain, inflationary pressures, etc. And that has a compounding effect, not just within the industry or whatever industries you're in, but I think awareness in general population here in the UK anyway is much higher. I think people now are obviously very conscious of what their bills are going to cost, and I think there is a realism that a power cut could be a reality at some point. I don't mean just a power cut, I mean actually power outage for perhaps a sustained period. I mean, we're less dependent here in the UK on gas supplies from Russia, but there's other countries that are more dependent. So the awareness and the concern around this issue have increased considerably.
And I think that complacency was highlighted with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. All of a sudden, everyone was aware of where the gas came from, and it made them realise, oh, don't like that, and they're going to potentially pay the prices for it.
And I think, COVID as well, with the supply chain, made people think more where things are coming from.
Yeah, and I think that leads on to one of the questions we had earlier about, risk managers. There's certainly a lot more questions being asked and a lot more engagement I find with me as a professional risk manager from people. They seem to be more interested now in listening to what we have to say and working with us than they did previously. Unfortunately, I think it's potentially taken COVID to drive that, and some of following on the Ukraine-Russia events. But there does seem to be more interested in what we do and what we can do for a business.
Mm.
Okay, Rania, do we have any more
And
questions?
2 more. One for the energy pair, Grant and Rick. Hydrogen is gaining prominence like never before. Should we not be focusing on electrification and storage rather than on an energy carrier such as blue, green hydrogen? I can repeat.
No, got it. Yeah, that's
Definitely for Grant. Definitely for Grant.
Come on, Reich. I know Reich will join in on this too. But yeah, look, definitely hydrogen. One of the big things is there needs to be more creation of demand for hydrogen. We're actually seeing in the UK, I think some of the numbers I've seen that there is a really big drive there. There's a lot of initiatives happening. And globally, I think it's about $2.5 trillion is the estimated hydrogen market. And we're sort of looking, I don't have a firm timeline, but that's sort of over the next 10 or so years. So definitely a really big area. And yes, this whole thing about what the 8 or 9 different colors of hydrogen, I think that's been somewhat of a red herring, but we are seeing, for example, some of the renewables projects that are going on. They're talking about they can power X number of houses, but they've also got an excess. So what they can do is actually use that for green hydrogen production. But I think there really does have to be a meaningful demand side drive, and that's really down to governments to actually create the right consumer, industrial and regulatory frameworks to support that happening. And I really do believe that to that extent, the UK is making a lot more inroads than a lot of other countries on that front. Yeah.
Thank you, Grant. And a last question is, how would you rate, follow up. It's, I think we can see it, it's posted for everyone. So how would you rate the effectiveness of risk management for the interruption to cloud services that could impact an organization, both from the availability of energy and the transition from one form to another? Looking at the marine supply chain, which fuel do you think, oh, that's the second question, sorry. So I think it's an energy question.
Yeah, but we want to start that one, Reich. Go on.
So let me take that a little bit. Let me take that one level up, right? So if you talk about the interruption of cloud services due to the availability of energy, so that would, to me, that would be part of your business continuity, ICT, disaster recovery type of plan. So I'm hoping no one actually has their information solely stored on a cloud service somewhere, because obviously you would not just be relying on the electricity, but you'll be also be relying on the rest of the ICT infrastructure. I also think that overall, that if it really gets to the point that, you know, there's not enough energy to, you know, to run these type of services, that might be other bigger issues you will have when it comes to your organization. So but overall, I mean, what I've seen, I know the organization I've worked with, they look at cloud services as a means to things, and those, it does always get addressed within the ICT disaster recovery plan. So I would say that that's even a discipline on its own within the ICT sector. So I'm not too worried about the effectiveness of risk management there. I think that's quite normal, at least from what I see. But like I said, I think that if you really have, you know, the situation where, you know, availability of energy really affects your cloud services, that there is bigger things to worry about than just your data, I think.
Yeah. As risk managers, we would have a contingency, not to have everything in one place. A second question, and that will be for the energy pair and for Nicola. Looking at the marine supply chain, which fuel do you think could provide best opportunity for low carbon fuel in future, hydrogen or fusion?
Well, fusion itself isn't the fuel. So hydrogen isotopes are the tritium and the deuterium that I mentioned earlier, which are the typical fuel sources to generate fusion. So I don't know much about the hydrogen energy production in itself and the facilities there. That's a different type of technology. But as I alluded to earlier in my presentation, I think fusion, once it's viable and commercial, will be enough to meet the world's energy needs, because it's an infinite clean power source and the most fuel abundant as well, over and above other types of energy production.
Thank you very much. This is the end of all the questions. I think as a closing note to everyone, we can ask, it was asked before, what can risk professionals, so what can we do as risk professionals to do, to make a difference? If anyone wants to do a closing answer, what can we do as risk professionals?
I'll try and crack it, and others may want to close out far better than I could. I would say one thing, and it's come up from a lot of organisations, is, you know, with risk management, they want to hear risk management discussed within the context of the business. I think we're there as a risk profession. However, not all organisations support that. I think, you know, again, it comes down to the organisational structure and how they view risk. So it's really a chicken and egg situation. But I think if risk managers can you know, put their business mindsets on a lot more, that really helps to drive value creation and problem solving. That's my 2 cents worth anyway.
Thank you, Grant.
Rania, my few cents are get out there and promote informed risk taking. We've got to get comfortable with taking some risks. Again, I'm, you know, if anyone hasn't seen the film Along Came Polly, God, it's funny.
I think everyone is going to go and see that movie after this, Matthew.
Just making a note of that one. Along Came Polly.
Get out there and do some skinny dipping, folks.
Okay.
I think that's
all
quite true. It's a matter of culture changing. Chicken and egg. We can have all the best intentions as risk managers, but we serve an organization, and we're not the decision makers, but we are facilitators, so we can help. The best thing we can do is help inform and educate our stakeholders in the various projects that we find ourselves, or organizations. And I think we are seeing a culture change, and that's driven by many factors. Like Grant said, there's many generations working at the same time, and each generation has, probably the youngest of us are more concerned about the climate change because we will be alive when it happens. So a bit of a dark humor here, but it's true. So we're seeing a trend of change. So things are changing, whether they're at the fast pace that we need it to or not. It's something we will have to see, but everyone just should continue to put their best efforts and continue to inform and educate people to make a change. So I think from my side, I think that's the best that we can all do, along with continuing best practice as always. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Rania. Smashing job on that one. We had on our agenda to invite Isabel back for some closing comments. She opened the symposium for us with her presentation, and we just wanted to give her the chance to round up everything that's been talked about and everything that's been asked about. Isabel, are you still with us? There we go. Excellent. What are your closing thoughts on what we've seen this afternoon?
Well, first, I'd like to start by thanking all of you and the speakers for their excellent, thought-provoking talks, the session chairpersons for organizing and keeping things both under control and reasonably on time. I am very impressed with your timekeeping, Rania and Martin. But I'd also like to say that, you know, for an event like this, virtual, it takes a lot of work, and, you know, get the best organizing and program committee you can to support this. So well done, Rania, well done, Martin, and well done to the speakers. And I think we did at this symposium cover a lot of ground, and the meeting has been a success. I mean, you know, if we could do this every quarter, wouldn't it be wonderful? But no pressure, Rania, no pressure. Martin. However, most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you, the participants. Without your input, ideas, and discussion, this workshop would not have been a success at all. I was amazed at the number of individuals who did sign up for this, and of course, a little bit less when we get to the day and to the session time, but the number of people who were saying they would like to hear the recording, they were disappointed they couldn't attend today, was you know, very much an accolade to this, the organizing committee, the speakers, and of course, this fascinating topic. So when I started out, I tried to outline what I felt we were trying to get at here. And what I walked away with and this is very broad in the presentation sense, is encouraging communication between risk professions and other professions, and using climate change to galvanize that, or ESG more broadly. Exchanging ideas and opinions on subjects of common interest. If we think back to my original slide of the aspects of climate change, all of those could be easily workshop topics of their own. Finding out what other people are doing. And, you know, next time it would be great if people came off mute and maybe asked a few questions, but, you know, we now all know, we know one another a little bit more, so maybe that will happen next time. Create contacts between people. Joint collaboration is key. I mean, I had very limited understanding of fusion energy. I'm ashamed to say I lived in the United Arab Emirates for 7 years, and I didn't know about the nuclear energy consortium there, and so it was interesting to hear about that and how the UAE is leading and other jurisdictions in areas of alternative energy and more traditional energy sources. But what I've walked away from this session understanding is regulation and commitment to decarbonization has been mixed, but the energy transition will continue to increase in importance as investors prioritize ESG factors. And that is key in climate change, because not only is it an E, but there is that S and the G that are so important. And particularly, I'm thinking back to the TCFD framework that I mentioned in my presentation. Governance is the first aspect that needs to take place when addressing climate change through an ESG lens. The social piece, getting back to my other slide of the just transition, is key as well. The future is energy, but with lower carbon, and we intend to be a leader today and in the future. So there has to be that lower carbon element to be the leader in the future. And we all need to accomplish our energy transition goals with strong, again, governance, risk management, business strategy, climate policy principles coupled with actions and investments. And I think one area that we didn't cover in this session was the advocacy and NGO groups. Unfortunately, we didn't have them represented in the speaking mix, but we certainly all recognize the role that advocacy plays now in climate change, and in particular in that generational piece and the youth. And I don't think we have any youth on this call. And when I think of youth, I think of under, 21, under 18 years old. So again, I mean, that perspective is one that we all need to take into consideration when we are thinking about the energy transition and in particular the climate change. So we've heard some very complete presentations, and I won't touch on any of those because we're all going to get a recording, and I know you all got a package as well, but and it's not for me to repeat them, but instead I'd like to share with you some of my personal views of this meeting. And really they do get back to policy, investment, carbon intensity, strategy portfolio, risk management, culture of an organization, reading where the organization is and mapping that out, having a really clear and engaged planning process. And that whole organizational resilience, and that is key in ESG, and in particular in that climate change as we come out of COVID-19, as we may go into, and I don't want to sound doom and gloom, another global pandemic. We never know, because what's going to be around the corner, and resilience is key. There is the other piece of you know, the fifth industrial revolution, and always knowing that we are changing, we are adapting, and getting back to that resilience piece, we do play a role. So I am going to close out the session now. However, we did want to have a discussion on the just transition, but I will hand that back to Rania and Martin as to whether we wanted to continue with that. But it's been a pleasure, and you know, it's now, the sun has risen in Vancouver, Canada. So thank you for kicking off my day with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Martin?
We are running short on time. I think we've kept very well to the end that we sketched out with a few minutes here and there. I would suggest as that we've been going for 2.5 hours, just over 2.5 hours now, that we look to wind up the event. Does anyone, before we do that, have any questions or anything else they want to ask very quickly? I'm going to take silence as a big no on this one.
You can always come off mute, people.
No, I'm with you on that one. I'm with you on that one. We've dropped down quite a lot.
We had someone more courageous before we started. That was talking to us. No worries. It's at the end of a work day, so you know. Yeah, we're just over 2.5 hours in, so that was kind of what we thought the duration was going to be. So I think with the people ducking off, I think what we'll do is we'll bring this session to a close. Isabel, thank you for your closing words there, and I'd also like to add my thanks to the other presenters that we've had this afternoon. It's been absolutely fascinating, and having worked in the nuclear industry for ages, Nicola, I loved what you were telling us all about what's going on with the plans that we've got for fission. And also I'd like to thank everyone that's attended. Without you guys, we don't have the motivation to do these things. I hope that it's been useful and an informative event, that you've taken something away from that you're going to talk about maybe around the dinner table tonight with your family or in the office tomorrow. And just some closing housekeeping, I suppose. The IRM will send out the presentation slides tomorrow. They will also send out the recording that's been running in the background of us all. And there's also a survey. As we mentioned this morning, please don't forget to do the survey. I think it's 8 or 9 questions, so it shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes, but we do find those valuable, both ourselves within the SIGs, but also the IRM, to give us a steer on what people want, what they like, and what they want to see going forward in the future. And finally, as I mentioned before, we'd love to make this an annual IRM event that's collaborative across all the SIGs, as we have been today. So please get involved. Look out for the the next events, publicize them, and join in next time. Coming off mute, I hope, as Isabel said as well. And from our side, I promise we'll get better, and we'll try and be a bit more proactive in getting the marketing out there and giving more people time to plan and join the events. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll stop the recording now, and we'll look to close down the meeting. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so.